This is what's interesting. When somebody has a coherent view, which it seems to me he does,
Yeah.
like his view is coherent, so it's not about showing the logical inconsistencies necessarily, like you might with atheism. It's more, perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, about showing where his consistent worldview leads to and why that's something he shouldn't want.
Yeah, I don't think it, and as I said in the debate, I don't think it's as consistent as someone like Peter Singer. Because Destiny, in his position on abortion, he's always leapfrogging between humanity and consciousness. So he will say, look, the reason fetuses aren't valuable is because they have not had a conscious experience yet. Consciousness is what makes us valuable. So he'll jump on consciousness to disqualify the unborn child. But then when people say, yeah, but animals have conscious experiences, why don't they count? But they don't have a human conscious experience. So he'll jump back to the human thing. They don't have, and then when people say, well, yeah, but what's the difference between, someone, the example that I gave, a newborn who is disabled and stuck at the newborn level forever being conscious, why do they get special protection versus an animal that will have higher ordered stuff for the rest of its life, like a pig, a mature pig?
Right, and here he tried to say that even though it's perhaps on the same level as a pig, it's not a human consciousness. What did you make of that argument, and did you expect it?
Oh, of course, and I think that it becomes ultimately arbitrary, that what is doing the work in his argument is the human part. The killing of a 24-week-old fetus, like I would say, what is so bad about that? What's bad about killing a conscious being? Normally it's because, well, you frustrate that being's desires. Especially, let's say you anesthetize a pig or a 24-week fetus. What's so bad about killing that thing that it ought to be illegal? Well, I guess it's you frustrate a 24-week-old fetus's desires. Okay, well, what about a pig's desires, a rat's desires? They're aware of things. And I think if you watch his engagement with Alex O'Connor, who is a vegan, by the way, or at least he endorses veganism, he really shows like if consciousness is what matters, you're really going to have to start including animals. But if you use humanity as a criterion to get rid of animals, well, surprise, surprise, unborn humans, fetuses and embryos, they're human. So the consciousness argument, if I had to phrase it this way, he uses a symmetry argument to say, look, if you stop existing when you no longer have consciousness, like for him, if you're brain dead or in a persistent vegetative state that you will never awaken from, you're not a person anymore, you've died. So you only become a person when you start being conscious. And that's why in the debate I offered another symmetry argument. I said, well, why couldn't you do this instead? I'll phrase it this way, which is probably an easier way to grasp it. You could take his argument and do this. So Destiny, you're saying that you are not a person if your future no longer contains conscious experience. Correct. Okay, so then you are a person if your future does contain conscious experiences. Well, almost every healthy human embryo or fetus has a future that contains conscious experiences. So like if you were in a persistent vegetative state and you're going to come out of it eventually, well, if we knew you're in a reversible coma, the fact you can't be conscious now, you will be conscious later. And he might say, yeah, but I had a conscious experience before and it's going to continue later. But that's not relevant because every conscious being is going to have a first conscious experience. It doesn't follow you come into existence at your first conscious experience. That's just the first experience that you have as a conscious being, but you existed prior to it. So that's what I show with his symmetry argument. Even if you used that reasoning, it doesn't work because he said, and that's why when you make arguments, I try to appeal to other people's positions. Even if you do believe, and I don't believe someone who permanently loses consciousness is not a person. I think they're a disabled person for a variety of reasons. But even if that were true, if your future no longer has conscious experiences, you're not a person. Fine. The symmetry of that is, if your future does contain these experiences, you are a person, even if you have to wait several months in the womb before you're able to have them. So yeah, I think his position is not as coherent as someone like Peter Singer. Like Singer would say, look, what makes you a person is that you have rational abilities beyond a non-human animal. That's what a person is. Mm-hmm. You can do things non-human animals can't. If you can't do those things, you're not a person. So infants can't do those things. They're not persons. With those kind of views, you just kind of have to bite the bullet. And I'd say to people, Now, there's other philosophical arguments you can make against these views beyond just biting a bullet. But for many lay people, you could say, do you think infanticide is wrong? That babies have a right to live? Well, yeah, then there must be something wrong with Singer's argument, just for a lay person at a basic level. And then I would make other philosophical arguments like, look, if you're saying an infant is not a person because it doesn't have rational abilities yet, what if that makes it, Singer's argument is based on the idea that if you treat one species better than another, that's speciesism. If you say, oh, well, infants matter because they're human. We shouldn't make distinctions among species any more than we do among races. But we do need to make distinction among species to determine what species are flourishing. The fact that a rat, let's see, like a pigeon, flying rats, are not rational. They can't engage in rationality doesn't mean they're disabled. Like I say, I have an example. Let's say I have a pill that I give to an organism that allows it to read a book. Okay. Do I give it to a dog or do I give it to a 10-year-old illiterate human child? Both of them can't read, but only one of them is disabled. And it's the human, because humans by their nature are supposed to be able to read. At least humans who live within society that has developed literacy. But we have these, the fact that we ought to have certain abilities in accord with our nature. Well, I think that really collapses the kind of arguments that Singer and others would put forward. So yeah, I think Destiny's position has some incoherencies, and I brought that out in the discussion. But also at the beginning, I just wanted to point out, hey, it leads to these morally repugnant conclusions. And I think a lot of people might say, I categorically reject those conclusions. So you'd have to reject his view.
So if consciousness is not necessary for personhood, then what is a person, and do we need to distinguish it from human?
Well, we need to say, when you say consciousness is not necessary, I would say we have to distinguish being the kind of being who has a rational conscious nature and having the immediate capacity to be conscious. So there's a difference between an immediate capacity and a natural capacity.
Okay.
All right. So I have the immediate capacity to speak English. I've said in my review. I have the natural capacity to speak other languages, but your Fancy Pints of the Aquinas mug has neither capacity. A rock, a rat, a dog, they don't have either capacity. So what makes humans valuable ultimately lies in some kind of capacity they have. And it has to be a natural capacity, because immediate capacities are things you can lose. So, for example, if the claim is you're a person, because some people will say this, Matt, they'll say, yeah, but what about when you're sleeping? You're not conscious then, are you not a person? The claim is, well, no, you have the immediate capacity to be conscious when you're asleep. Someone can just prod you and you wake up. It's like a car. It's like if someone said a car is a car if it can be driven. Like, well, my car is not being driven right now. Well, yeah, but you could turn the key and it'll turn on. But if it doesn't have an engine, it's not a car. Someone might say something like that. So the idea is that you have to have all the brain components to be conscious to be a person, would be the view. And that is what makes you a person. But I would say, okay, but what about somebody who, to give as a hypothetical then, what about someone who suffers a brain injury and their brain has to be rewired or regrow? Their brain physical constructs in the brain have to change before they can be conscious. There has to be a physical change in their brain to heal before they are conscious again. That is no different from a 19-week fetus who must have a change in physical constructs before it becomes conscious in the 20 to 24-week range. So if you're not a person at 19 weeks because you haven't had that physical development yet, then it would seem our brain-injured fellow in the hospital is not a person. They're not a person anymore. They have no right to medical care. We could just kill them. Well, that doesn't
what
seem.
Did Destiny say in response to that claim?
I cannot remember his reply to that particular example. I think I brought it up, but it might have been brushed past.
You have an approximate.
I can't remember.
Timestamp?
He has. I think it also came up with Lila and Kristen. A little bit, something like that. But his reply is usually something like, yes, but the brain injured person already had consciousness and it's going to continue. But that's irrelevant to the question. I think that's his general reply. I think that's what he said in our discussion as well, that yes, but prior to the brain injury, I existed. After the brain injury, I will continue to exist, is a psychological continuity view of human identity. But my point is that has nothing to do with your definition. The definition is a person has the immediate ability to be conscious, has the physical accoutrements to be conscious that are in the brain. And this brain injured person in the example does not have that yet. So that's just one example to put forward there. So I think ultimately grounding our value in an immediate capacity for consciousness will lead to the exploitation of disabled people. It will ultimately lead to that, and or justify causing pre-conscious fetuses to just make them brain dead, make them disabled, or make them unconscious, I should say. So I think there's no incoherency in saying that every human being has intrinsic value simply in virtue of their humanity, because they belong to a rational kind.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.